So I'm Philip Kennedy. I'm the general editor of the Library of Arabic Literature, which is putting on a show for you tonight entitled Wolves, Gorillas, Jerboas, and More, Animals in the Library of Arabic Literature. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Michael Peruganen, Professor Michael Peruganen, the director of NYU Abu Dhabi House, 19 Washington Square North, it's called officially. I'd like to welcome you on his behalf. He asked me to say a few words of introduction and just really welcome. This event today is jointly sponsored by the Library of Arabic Literature and 19 Washington Square North, so we're very pleased about that and grateful to 19 Washington Square North and Dr. Peruganen for hosting us. What I should just say briefly is that this event is actually being held in conjunction with a workshop that is being held over the next 2 days. Started yesterday, went through today and tomorrow. A workshop where the board of the Library of Arabic Literature just meet to carry through the business of the library. What is the Library of Arabic Literature? Well, you'll get to know that, I think, through the course of today, but it is a huge project, relatively speaking, in the field that has as its remit to translate as much as possible, without borders, without limits, the treasures of pre-modern Arabic literature into English with facing page translations, in facing page translations. So the Arabic on one side, the English on the other. It's a huge project, generously financed by the Institute back in NYU Abu Dhabi, in the Emirates. So I think without further ado, I don't want to keep these wonderful people from you. I'm going to give them the floor. I don't know who's leading off, either Maurice Pomerantz or Laura Harb, I think, or Huda Fakhreddine. In any event, I'll leave you to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me? Masal khair, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this afternoon. As Phil mentioned, our event is called Wolves, Gorillas, a Jerboa, and More. It's one distinguished Jerboa. And our idea here is to read to you selections from the Library of Arabic Literature that features animals, connections with animals, lives of animals, thoughts of animals, and maybe have a conversation afterwards. This was Dr. Bilal Urfali's suggestion when we met last, so thanks to him. And also motivated by this recent turn in the humanities and in literary studies, which is labeled the animal/non-human turn, which may be understood in many ways as a reaction to crisis. Right? We live in a world that is ending, and therefore dystopian and speculative realities have become a dominant framework for literary production. And this urgent interest in environmental studies has led to what we call eco-literature and eco-criticism, and the lens of the animal or the non-human through which human experience and literature are now viewed, examined, and critiqued. So now that we live on a planet on the brink of doom, I had to read that, I had it written down, with a setting or already set realization of having irrevocably ruined the world, we turn to other living beings and creatures to see what could have been had we led a more natural life as human beings. The animal and the non-human invites us to account for our effect or our intervention in the natural world. It also reminds us of how unnatural human existence has become. But long before this turn or this claimed turn in the humanities, Arab writers or writers and poets in the Arabic tradition have long turned to the human and the animal for companionship, rivalry, challenge, inspiration, life lessons. The original Arabic literary landscape is one shared fundamentally by the animal. And in fact, as many of you know, the qasida, the main Arabic literary form, is shaped or even composed in partnership with the animal. So animals like the she-camel and the horse and the sand grouse and the oryx and the gazelle, they feature in the qasida not only as themes, they are structural hinges of the poetic form. Animals in the Arabic literary tradition are expressions of emotion, connection with the world, and manifestations of inward experience. Something best summed up by none other than our friend Al-Mutanabbi when he describes al-khayl, the horse, and says, they are the very weave of life. With them you spite and defeat your enemies and you protect yourself. With them you live. ولكنهن حبال الحياة وكيد العداة وميط الأذى. So when Maurice and I sat down to prepare for this, we were trying, it wasn't very difficult, to find the connection between the animal and books, since we're celebrating the Library of Arabic Literature. And animals and books are really the truest and most steadfast friends to whom humans have long turned in times of crisis and need, when we want to account for our existence and our experience. Again, best summed up by Mutanabbi himself. So I have an issue, obviously. We can talk about that later. Mutanabbi. Best summed up by Mutanabbi in one of his most famous verses. The noblest, most dignified place you can be is in the saddle of your horse. And what better friend can you find than a book? أعز مكان في الدنا سرج سابح وخير جليس في الأنام كتابه.
Thank you, Huda. My name is Maurice Pomerantz. Hello, I'm a professor at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I'm the director of the Abu Dhabi Institute in Abu Dhabi. So it's nice to be here in Washington Square. We invite you this evening to consider the world many centuries before this present time. And we do so not to idealize the past, but instead to attend to its voices and read its signs, which come to us now in the form of books, a species of vertebrates, of course, books have spines, whose extinction is often prophesied in our digital age. In her lyrical history of ancient books and libraries, in Spanish it's El Infinito en un Junco, in English it's known as Papyrus, Irene Vallejo recounts her dark fears of an apocalypse of shuttered bookstores and abandoned libraries, in which books are displayed in glass cases at museums of anthropology near collections of prehistoric arrowheads. Books, however, are objects that have a stubborn persistence. Long after our iPhones, our iPads, and our laptops disappear, books will likely still be with us in one form or another. They're sort of like the wheel or a spoon, as Umberto Eco said. Tonight, they're great solutions to a human problem, that is. Tonight, we'll be reading from books that are part of the Library of Arabic Literature. It's a now 10-year-old project, a little more than that, to translate key texts and authors from the Arabic literary tradition. A library affords us the opportunity of allowing us to pay a visit to persons we would never be able to meet, to inhabit their spaces and carry on a conversation with these distant companions. The subject of our talk tonight, animals in Arabic literature, is as vast, unruly, and teeming with life as the kingdom it aims to describe. Many have come before us in thinking about the animal and the human in the Islamicate world, though. If rulers from across this world kept collections of beasts, animals also figured centrally in the imaginative menageries of poets and intellectuals. We cannot begin without mentioning the great collection of fables, Kalila wa Dimna, composed by Ibn al-Muqaffa in the 8th century, which features animals as the actors in a series of complex tales of advice for rulers and courtiers. I trust that those of you who are interested in this topic will consult the new translation of this work by the Library of Arabic Literature, which is right here and right there. And I can give you no better piece of advice than to read it. And second, when our topic is animals in Arabic literature, we cannot begin, or I can't begin, without invoking one of the great masterpieces of Arabic literature, the Kitab al-Hayawan, the Book of the Living, by the great 9th century polymath, Jahiz. The Book of the Living is perhaps one of Arabic literature's best examples of what the literary critic Frank Kermode terms the bibliocosm, a book as the model of the world. Brimming with life, this book charts the relation between God, man, and 350 or so animals, and it is notoriously unruly. No translator or team of translators has yet tackled this multi-volumed beast of a project. I admonish ourselves that there is much more to do and many more book worlds to explore. But tonight we're going to read from 4 excerpts of books composed by 4 authors over the course of a millennium, from roughly the 6th century to the 18th century, which have been edited and translated by scholars working on the Library of Arabic Literature, and they will be read by members of the editorial board. Our first readers will be my colleague Huda from the University of Pennsylvania and James Montgomery from Cambridge University. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. So the first excerpt we will be reading is from Lamiyat al-Arab, Shamfara's astounding poem. It's selected from Fate the Hunter, recently published, a Lal book that's recently published, translated and edited by our very own James Montgomery. As some of you or all of you should know, Lamiyat al-Arab offers us an early, but I think one of the most resonant animal studies manifestos. It launches from rage, always a good thing, but also a deep-set disappointment in the human. Shamfara tells his people who have disappointed him and let him down, I can find better folk. There is a better tribe for me out there. وَإِنِّي إِلَىٰ قَوْمٍ سِوَاكُمْ لَأَمْيَلُوا وَلِيدُونَكُمْ أَهْلُونَ. And what better way to not just announce but perform the turn to the animal? Shamfara is confident that he can trust the wolf to always be a wolf, and the hyena to always be a hyena, and the snake to always be a snake. They are true to nature and their nature. But with a man and a woman, you never know what you get. A snake, a vulture, you never know. We are going to read the opening of the poem and the ending of the poem, and from the middle, we're going to read the wolf section. The poem opens with Shamfara as frustrated and let down, as a frustrated, let down human who abandons his people and sets out into nature, travels the harsh terrain. He overcomes hunger, compares himself to a hungry wolf and his pack, and shows us how a pack of wolves sticks together, unlike his tribe. They go hungry together and they return defeated together. And then the poem beautifully ends with this frustrated man comparing himself, or rather transforming into a content, protected buck, a mountain goat, happy among his kind on the mountain slope. Happy ending. I will read the Arabic and then James will read his brilliant translation. Yes. أقيموا بني أمي صدور مطيكم فإني إلى قوم سواكم لأميل وقد حمت الحاجات والليل مقمر وشدت لطيات مطايا وأرحل وفي الأرض منأ للكريم عن الأذى وفيها لمن خاف القلى متعزل لعمرك ما في الأرض ضيق على امرئ سرى راغبا أو راهبا وهو يعقل ولي دونكم أهلون سيد عملس وأرقط زهلول وعرفاء جيئل هم الأهل لا مستودع السر ذائع لديهم ولا الجاني بما جر يخذل وكل أبي باسل غير أنني إذا عرضت أولى الطرائد أبسل وإن مدت الأيدي إلى الزاد لم أكن بأعجلهم إذ أشجع القوم أعجلوا وما ذاك إلا بسطة عن تفضل عليهم وكان الأفضل المتفضل وإني وإني كفاني فقد من ليس جازيا بحسنى ولا في قربه متعلل. ثلاثة أصحاب فؤاد مشيع وأبيض إسليط وصفراء عيطل. هتوف هتوف من الملس المتون يزينها، رصائع قد نيطت إليها ومحمل. إذا زل عنها السهم حنت كأنها مرزأة عجلة ترن وتعول. إذا الأمعز الصوان لاقى مناسمي تطاير منه قادح ومفلل. أديم مطال الجوع حتى أميته وأضرب عنه الذكر صفحا فأذهل. وأستف ترب الأرض كي لا يرى له علي من الطول امرؤ متطول. ولولا اجتناب الذام لم يلف مشرب يعاش به إلا لدي ومأكل. ولكن نفسا مرة لا تقيم بي على الذام إلا ريثما أتحول. وأطوي على الخمص الحوايا كمن طوت خيوط ماري تغار وتفتل. وأغدو على القوت الزهيد كما غدا أزل تهاداه التنائف أطحل. غدا طاويا يعارض الريح هافيا يخوت بأذناب الشعاب ويعسل. ولما لواه القوت من حيث أمه دعا فأجابته نظائر نحل. مهلهلة شيب الوجوه كأنها قداح بأيدي ياسر تتقلقل، أو الخشرم المبعوث حثحث دبره. محابيض أرداهن سام معسل، مهترة فوه كأن شدوقها شقوق العصي كالحات وبسل. فضج وضجت بالبراح كأنها وإياه نوح فوق علياء ثكل. وأغضى وأغضت واتسى واتست به مراميل عزاها وعزته مرمل. شكا وشكت ثم ارعوى بعد وارعوت، ولا الصبر إن لم ينفع الشكو أجمل. وفاء وفاءت بادرات وكلها على نكظ مما يكاتم مجمل. ويوم من الشعر يذوب لوابه أفاعيه في رمضائه تتململ. نصبت له وجهي ولكن دونه ولا ستر إلا الأتحمي المرعبل. وضاف إذا هبت له الريح طيرت، لبائد عن أعطافه ما ترجل. بعيد بمس الدهن والفلي عهده، له عبس عاف من الغسل محول. وخرق we're getting there وخرق كظهر الترس قفر قطعته، بعاملتين ظهره ليس يعمل. فألحقت أولاه بأخراه موفيا على قنة أقعي مرارا وأمثل. ترود الأراوي الصحم حولي كأنها عذارى عليهن الملاء المذيل. ويركضن بالآصال حولي كأنني من العصم أدفى ينتحي الكيح أعقل.
I think I should start by saying thank you very much to Huda for that spirited and passionate recitation of the poem from memory, I believe. And I think you told me at lunchtime today that you first memorized it when you were 5 years old. And one of the great things about working, the privilege of working with books and with literature is that they are often, in the course of your life, voyages of discovery that become voyages of self-discovery. I myself remember the very first time I read this poem in 1985, when I had just completed 1 year of my PhD at the University of Oxford, and I had been invited that summer to a very select gathering of academics, and the subject of the workshop was to be this very poem. And although I struggled terribly with the Arabic, because it is extremely obscure, however beautiful it sounds, I instantly was captivated by its savage beauty. And I sort of, I guess I became infatuated, perhaps even fell in love with this poem that I was struggling to understand. And in the course of the subsequent years, it very much became an obsession. I couldn't leave the poem alone. I wanted to try to get beneath somehow the surface of the language, to imagine myself, insofar as it was possible, for a 26-year-old from Glasgow in Scotland to imagine what it would be like to be a savage warrior in the Arabian Peninsula, who at the end of his poem is transformed into an ibex. I did my best. Of course, I didn't quite succeed. But in the course of that work, I became convinced, the way most young men and most young scholars do, that in fact, the central animal of the poem wasn't a wolf at all, but a vulture. I spent about 3 years trying to prove this. It seems so silly to me now. You know, the hot-headedness of youth, the perhaps arrogance that I wanted to show the world that I knew more than anyone else about this poem. I even gave a paper at an international conference in Budapest in 1988 to a very distinguished audience, arguing that the central animal is not, in fact, a wolf, but a vulture. Of course, now that I'm much older and perhaps no little wiser, but a bit more common sense, I was wrong. Part of the problem was that I didn't know enough about Arabic poetry. Because the fascinating thing about Arabic poetry for me is that from the very first poems that we have, it's almost as if all of subsequent Arabic poetry is contained in those original poems. And you can't really understand the early poems without understanding all of Arabic poetry, insofar as that is even humanly possible. So now that I've read a lot more Arabic poetry now than I had then, I felt that I should finally, in front of an audience, come clean and confess that I was wrong, and that I retract all of the rather ambitious statements that I made. And when I was translating this wonderful poem for my book, I was doing it very much as an act of atonement for what I had said foolishly all those years ago. So Huda's already said a few words about the poem. My only thing I would add to it is that the ending of the poem is rather ambiguous. One of the central ideas of the Jahili universe is that whilst man hunts animals, man is himself hunted by fate. So he's both hunter and hunted. And in this poem, Ashanfara is hunted by, on the first hand, by his enemies for the crimes that he has committed. In order to try and escape those crimes, he effectively transforms himself into a mountain goat, into an ibex. And it does end, as Huda says, on this kind of seeming note of calm and security, where the poet, who is now animal, is surrounded by the herd that he can trust. But we know from reading other poems from the period that one of the central animals that is hunted and is killed is in fact the ibex. So the poet's sense of happiness, of release, of safety is fleeting. It is completely passing because his transformation into the mountain goat is effectively, for me, a signal that he is about to be hunted and killed by fate. Let me begin with a translation of the sections that Huda read. Up with your camels, brothers. I'm eager to raid our foes. The moon is high, we have what we need. Our mounts are saddled, ready for victory. The earth shelters those who shun hatred and protects the noble from harm. But a hero on a night raid in quest of spoils or a mountain retreat should be bold. If you decide not to raid, I'll turn to other folk who don't reveal secrets or betray the transgressor for his deeds. The far-ranging wolf, the speckled viper, the shaggy-maned hyena. These are my kin, proud and ferocious. But when I sight quarry, I'm no less ferocious. When hands grab for food, I hang back, for hurry is a sign of greed. My superiority lies in my noble displays of largesse. I can boast of 3 comrades, a bolt heart, a burnished blade, a yellow twanging, long and necked, smooth-backed bow, trimmed with leather thongs and carried with a strap. When it fires an arrow, it wails like a woman screaming for a dead child. What need of those who won't repay a good deed, whose kinship brings no solace? And so to the wolf description. I never lose my way in the dark, even if my fleet camel gets confused by the vast, trackless desert, her feet pounding the flinty ground, causing sparks to fly. I'd rather starve than owe anything in return. I'd rather eat dirt than have anyone think I'm beholden to him for his charity. Food and drink would be mine aplenty, but for my refusal of shame, which my bitter soul won't abide. I must roam free, twisting my guts against hunger as tightly as a craftsman deftly twines the strands of a rope. Despite my meager fare, I cross the dark to hunt, like the ravenous, lean-hipped, spleen-dark wolf of the wastes, who lopes along sideways against the wind, sniffing for prey as he speeds through the tail ends of ravines. Carrion diverts him from his course, his call answered by other grizzled, scrawny wolves, lank as the clack of arrows in a gambler's hands or an angry swarm of bees, their hives stirred by the sticks of a honey gatherer high on the rock face. Their mouths agape, their jaws as thin as splintered branches, the wolves grimace, emitting a chorus of howls on the plain like the keens of women wailing on a hilltop. Finding comfort in shared misery, the pack blinks and howls at each other. The laments now exchanged, now assuaged. What good are empty laments? They turn away and retrace their paths, picking up speed, putting a brave face on their inner disarray. Dog days, when the mirage melts and flows like water, when the ground's too hot for vipers, I'm out there with no cloth or scarf to protect me, clad in my tattered Athami robe, my hair a thick, tangled mass of uncombed knots blown by the wind, a stranger to the touch of oil or delousing, matted into clumps of filth, unwashed for ages. A desert waste, flat as the back of a shield, rough to traverse. From one end to the other, I cross it on foot, then climb a peak where I watch on the lookout as the ibex crowd around me like maidens in fringed gowns circling an idol. At night, they sleep beside me as if I were a white-legged longhorn buck scaling the steep scarps to my mountain retreat. Thank you.
Thank you, James. The next excerpt will be read to us by Bilal, is from the Book of Travels, and will be read to us by Bilal Urfali of AUB, American University of Beirut, and Chip Rossetti, the managing editor of LA. Please. Yes. And Maurice is going to introduce.
And the Book of Travels. As we said, the passage we're going to read is the Book of Travels of Hannah Diab, and it was edited by Johannes Stefan and translated by Elias Mohanna. Diab is a character very well known to scholars of the 1001 Nights as the person who told a series of 15 tales to the famed translator Antoine Galland in 1709. Now, among these tales are some of the most beloved stories of the 1001 Nights, known probably to many of you here as Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Aladdin, or Aladdin. Scholars of the Nights know these term these the orphan tales, because they have no existence in the 15th century manuscript from which Galland translated his Mille et une Nuits. Hannah Diab's Book of Travels is a remarkable account of the voyages that this Aleppan Maronite Christian, Diab, took around the Mediterranean as the translator and helpmeet of the French, sometimes doctor, sometimes Orientalist, Paul Lucas. The passage we will read here describes how Diab and Lucas brought some new animal visitors to what they termed the court of the Sultan of France. We know him as Louis XIV, in Versailles in that very same year, 1709. So.
Thank you, Maurice. I'm terribly jet lagged, so bear with me. And so the text is written in Middle Arabic. It's a register of the language that combines colloquial and classical Arabic. So I'm going to try to preserve that register. أخيراً اتقدم الوزير وسأل الملك إن كان بيريد يتفرج على تلك الوحوش، فأمر الملك بإحضارهم أمامه. حينئذ أخذوا من يد القفص ووضعوه أمام الملك. فلما رأى الوحوش تعجب من خلقتهم، فسأل معلمي في أي البلاد وجدهم، فأجابه في بلاد الصعيد. فسأله أيضا هل أنهم أنثى وذكر؟ فأجابه يا سيدي كانوا 7، وكان موجود فيهم ذكر وأنثى، والآن ما عدت أعرف إن كان موجود فيهم أنثى وذكر. فسأله أيضا ما اسمهم في بلادهم؟ فخجل معلمي وما كان بيعرف اسمهم، أو أنه نسي. فالتفت إلي وقال لحضرة الملك بأن هالغلام الذي معي بيعرف أساميهم. حينئذ التفت الملك وكل أكابر الدولة حولي، وسألني واحد منهم عن اسم هذه الوحوش، فقلت لهم بأن في بلادهم بيسمى جربوع. جربوع in the title. فأمر الملك بأن يقدموا لي قلم وقرطاز، حتى أكتب اسمهم بلساني. فلما قدموا لي القرطاس فكتبت اسمهم بلساني العربي، وكتبت أيضا بلساني الفرنساوي لأني أعرف أقرأ وأكتب بالفرنساوي. فبعدما كتبت اسمهم كما ذكرنا وعرضوه لحضرة الملك، فتفرس في الملك وسأل معلمي: ما هو هذا الغلام ومن أي بلاد هو؟ فأجابه معلمي وهو هاني هامه للأرض بأن يا سيدي هذا الغلام من بلاد سوريا، من أرض المقدسة، وهو من طائفة الموارنة الذين استقاموا في الكنيسة البطرسية من عهد الرسل وما انشقوا منها إلى الآن. وفي ذلك الوقت دخل مونسنيور لدلفن ابن الملك، وهو رجل مربوع القامة عفي من الرجال، وهذا يقال عنه بأن أبوه ملك وابنه البكر ملك إسبانيا وما هو ملك. فتقدم وتفرج على تلك الوحوش، فلما رآهم اتعجب من خلقتهم، وكان عنده صورة كبيرة عظيمة مصور فيها جميع الوحوش الموجودين في الدنيا بأسرها ما عدا هذا الوحش. حينئذ أمر بإحضار حكيم الملك الذي اسمه مونسيو فيكو، وهذا رجل عالم ومعلم وما له مثيل في سائر الدنيا في علم الطب والطبيعيات وما شاكل هذه العلوم. فلما حضر مسيو فيكو المذكور وتفرج على تلك الوحوش، فسألوا ابن الملك المذكور قائلا له: هل له خبرة فيهم أو أنهم مذكورين في كتب الطبيعيات؟ فأجابوا بأن ما رأى لهم ذكر ولا صورة. حينئذ أرسل وأحضر المصور حتى يصورهم داخل صورة الوحوش اللي عنده. وبعد أمر الملك للوزير بأن يبقي هالوحوش وحاملهم كمان في مكان ولا يدع أحد يراهم إلى حين ما ترجع مدام دي بيركونوا من الصيد التي هي كنة الملك، مرت ابن الملك، يدعى دي بيركونوا، وكان الملك يحبها غاية المحبة ويسميها بنته. وهذه أول مرة اللي تشرفت في رؤية الملك المذكور في ديوانه، أعني به سلطان فرنسا لويس الرابع عشر من هذا الاسم. وجميع اللي ذكرته حتى الآن هو بغاية التحقيق من غير زود ولا نقص. أما كتبته بالمختصر لئلا يتوهم القارئ بأني بحلم في كلامي، لأني رأيت أشياء كثيرة وما كتبتها ولا بقت في بالي من 54 سنة، لأني لما كتبت هالسياحة وهذا الخبر كنت في سنة 1763، وأنا كنت موجود في مدينة باريس سنة 1709. هل عاد يجي في بالي جميع اللي رأيته وسمعته بالتمام؟ كلا.
Thank you, Bilal. I'll now read the translation done by Dr. Elias Mahana. It's a wonderful translation of this text, which is really, as I was thinking about it, it's about exoticizing an animal from distant lands of the Said. But of course, the other animal who's being exoticized here is the narrator himself, Hana Diab. The minister then stepped forward and asked if the king would like to see the animals, and the king ordered them to be brought forward. They took the cage from me and set it before him. When he saw the creatures, he was astonished by their appearance and asked my master where he'd found them. In Upper Egypt, he replied. Is there one female and one male? Sire, there were originally 7, both male and female, my master explained. At present, however, I no longer know whether they're female or male. And what are the animals called in their country? The king asked. My master, who didn't know the name, or perhaps had forgotten it, looked embarrassed and turned to me. Your Majesty, the young man who accompanied me knows what they're called. The king and all his nobles turned to face me. Someone asked me what the animals were called. I replied that in the lands where it is found, the animal is called a jerboa. Then the king ordered his attendants to give me a pen and paper so that I could write the name down in my language. I took the paper and wrote the name in Arabic as well as French, for I know how to read and write in French. After I'd written the words and they'd showed them to His Majesty the King, he studied me carefully. Who is this young man? He asked my master. What country is he from? My lord, this young man is from Syria, in the Holy Land, my master said, looking down. He belongs to the Maronite sect, which has been part of the Church of St. Peter since the time of the apostles, from which it has never diverged even to the present day. At that moment, Monsieur the Dauphin, the king's son, entered the room. He was of medium height and quite rotund. People like to point out that although both his father and firstborn son were kings, the latter being the King of Spain, the Dauphin was not a king himself. He came forward to examine the animals and was amazed. He had an enormous drawing in which all the animals in the world were represented, with the exception of these particular ones. He summoned the king's physician, Monsieur Fakhreddine, a learned man whose knowledge of medicine, natural science, and other such disciplines were unrivaled in all the world. Monsieur Fakhreddine appeared and looked at the animals, and the king's son asked him if he knew anything about them. Are they mentioned in any books of natural science? He asked. And the physician replied that he'd never heard of such creatures, nor seen a drawing of them. Monseigneur the Dauphin called for an artist to add them to his illustration of wild beasts. And the king ordered the minister to hold the animals and their keeper in a place where they wouldn't be seen until such time as Madame de Bourgogne returned from the hunt. She was the king's daughter-in-law, the wife of his son, the Duke of Bourgogne, and the king loved her like a daughter. That was the first time I had the great honor of meeting King Louis XIV, the Sultan of France, in his council room, and I faithfully recounted everything that took place without any additions or omissions. But I've also been brief about it, so the reader won't suspect that I've dreamt all of this up. After all, I witnessed many things on my journey that I haven't set down in writing and that haven't remained in my memory for these past 54 years. As I now write this account of my voyage, it is the year 1763. I visited Paris in 1709. Is it possible I could have retained everything I saw and heard in perfect detail? Surely not.
The next excerpt is from A Physician on the Nile, which is a Lal book edited by Shaukat Turawa and translated by Tim McIntosh Smith. This is a work of travel literature in which Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi takes upon himself to present a most detailed account of everyday life in Egypt leading up to the plague and the years of famine in the early 13th century. With accuracy and urgency, as if in resistance to the history and its horrors, which he records in the second part of the book, Baghdadi in the first part of the book observes and describes everything, and especially the animals unique to Egypt. In this excerpt, you will hear about the jolter, a fish that can shock you if you touch it while it's alive, the water snake, the shield, an enormous tortoise with a shield-like shell and out of whose eggs al-Baghdadi did make an omelet. And finally, the tiny Dilinus, a tiny shell creature, nauseating, but some claim appetizing. The excerpt will be read by Dr. Lara Harb of Princeton University and Dr. Muhammad Rustum, University of Carleton.
Thank you, Huda. So I'll read the Arabic, which is not as eloquent as the poetry we heard, and it's in classical standard Arabic, not in Middle Arabic, as we heard from Hanna Diab's book. But it's a very non-flourishy Arabic. It's just describing the animal life that he sees, and especially in the section of fish as and sea creatures, as Huda was describing. ومن ذلك السمكة المعروفة بالرعاد، لأنه من أمسكها وهي حية ارتعد رعدة لا يمكنه معها أن يتماسك، وهي رعدة بقرة وخدر شديد وتنمل في الأعضاء وثقل، بحيث لا يقدر أن يملك نفسه ولا أن يمسك بيده شيئا أصلا. ويتراقى الخدر إلى عضده وكتفه وإلى جنبه بأسره حينما يلمسها أيسر لمس في أسرع وقت. وخبرني صيادها أنها إذا وقعت في الشبكة اعترى الصياد ذلك إذا بقي بينه وبينها مقدار شبر أو أكثر من غير أن يضع يده عليها، وهي إذا ماتت بطلت هذه الخاصة منها. وهي من السمك الذي لا تلفيس له، ولحمها قليل الشوك كثير الدسم، ولها جلد ثخين في ثخن الإصبع ينسلخ عنها بسهولة ولا يمكن أكله. ويوجد منها الصغير والكبير وما بين رطل إلى 20 رطل. وذكر من يكثر السباحة بنواحيها أنها إذا نفحت بدن السابح خدر الموضع أين كان ساعة بحيث يكاد يسقط، وتكثر بأسافل الأرض وبالإسكندرية. وأما أصناف السمك عندهم فكثيرة، لأنه يجتمع إليهم سمك النيل وسمك البحر الملح، ولا يفي القول بنعتها لكثرة أصنافها واختلاف أشكالها وألوانها. ومنها الصنف المسمى عندهم ثعبان الماء، وهي سمكة كالحية سواء، طولها ما بين ذراع إلى 3 أذرع. ومنها السرب، وهي سمكة تصاد من بحر الإسكندرية، يحدث لآكلها أحلام رديئة مفزعة، ولا سيما الغريب ومن لم يعتدها، والأحداثات المضحكة فيها مشهورة. ومن ذلك الترسة، وتسمى لجأة، وهي سلحفاة عظيمة وزنها نحو 4 قناطير، إلا أن جفنتها يعني عظم ظهرها كالترس، له أفاريز خارجة عن جسمها نحو الشبر. ورأيتها بالإسكندرية يقطع لحمها ويباع كلحم البقر، وفي لحمها ألوان مختلفة ما بين الأخضر والأحمر وأصفر وأسود وغير ذلك من الألوان. ويخرج من جوفها نحو 400 بيضة كبيض الدجاج سواء، إلا هو أنه لين القشر. واتخذت من بيضها عجة، فلما جمد صار ألوانا ما بين أخضر وأحمر وأصفر شبيها بألوان اللحم. ومن ذلك الدلينوس، وهو صدف مستدير إلى الطول أكبر من الظفر، ينشق عن رطوبة مخاطية بيضاء ذات نكتة سوداء يعافها الناظر، وفيه ملوحة عذبة زعموا، ويباع بالكيل.
Oh, thank you all very much. I'm told that there's going to be a live display of animals right out that door, actually. I'm kidding, actually. You're actually lucky because the one I'm about to read about first, this jolter, you don't want to get near it, apparently. So it goes like this. Another Egyptian creature is the fish known as the jolter, because anyone who takes hold of it when it is alive is shocked by a jolting sensation that makes him unable to maintain his composure. The jolt is accompanied by such shivering, severe numbness, tingling in the limbs, and heaviness that the person affected can neither control himself nor keep a grip on any object at all. The numbness spreads upwards to the upper arm and shoulder, then to the entire side of the body, even when one only gives the fish the lightest and most fleeting touch. A man who caught them told me that when a jolter had been netted, the fisherman would be overcome by the sensation, even if there was a gap of a span or more between him and the fish, without him even having to place his hand on it. When the fish dies, however, this peculiar property disappears. It is one of the kinds of fish that have no scales, and its flesh has few bones, but much oil. Its skin is thick as a finger, and easy to peel off, and is inedible. Both small and large ones are found, weighing between 1 ritl and 20 ritls. So a ritl is about like less than a pound. A person who often swam in areas that this fish frequents mentioned that if it brushes against the body of a swimmer, whatever place it touches will for a while be so numb that he will nearly fall over if he tries to stand. There were many of these fish in Lower Egypt and in the region of Alexandria. The Egyptians have many other sorts of fish because their land is the meeting place of fish from both the Nile and the Salt Sea. Indeed, there are so many kinds and such a variety of shapes and colors that words are not enough to describe them. For example, there is the sort called by the Egyptians the water snake. It is a fish just like a serpent between 1 and 3 cubits in length. Then there is the sarb, which is a fish caught in the waters of Alexandria. It gives anyone who eats it terrifying nightmares, particularly when the person is from outside the region or not used to eating it. The funny anecdote about these hallucinations are well known. The funny anecdotes about these hallucinations are well known, but he doesn't tell us any of them, and I was hoping that he would. Another sea creature is the shield, also called a turtle. This is an enormous tortoise weighing around 4 kantars, but differing from a tortoise in that its bowl, I mean the shell on its back, is like a shield with flanges that project about a span beyond its body. I saw one in Alexandria whose flesh was being cut up and sold like beef. The flesh of a shield exhibits a variety of colors ranging from green through red and yellow to black and other shades. Out of its belly come around 400 eggs, which are just like hen's eggs, except that they have soft shells. I made an omelet from some of these eggs, and when they congealed, they took on various colors, green, red, and yellow, similar to the colors of the flesh. Yet another sea creature is the clam called the dilinus, which has a shell that is oval in shape and somewhat larger than a fingernail. When open, one finds it inside it, a moist mucus white substance with a black spot, nauseating to look at. It has a salty taste that they claim is appetizing, and it is sold by the measure. Thank you.
So last but not least, the ape, the gorilla finally. And this excerpt will be presented to us by Dr. Maurice Pomerantz of NYU Abu Dhabi and Dr. Sean Anthony of the Ohio State.
Thanks so much, Huda. As Huda said, the final excerpt comes from the Book of the Charlatans by the 13th century Syrian author Jamal ad-Din al-Jawbari, which was edited by Manuela Dengler and translated by the late Humphrey Davies. In the Book of the Charlatans, al-Jawbari recounts the tricks and schemes of swindlers and con men who made their living by duping the gullible. So beware. As Davies, the translator, would often point out, al-Jawbari was himself a con artist, expert in all manner of tricks, from alchemy to horse dyeing. And in fact, we're going to talk a little bit more about people dying as well. Apparently that's how you hid a stolen horse back in the day. Or if you're a fugitive, how you hid yourself. He was also an unreliable narrator for whom exaggeration and deliberate falsehood was central to his intellectual gamesmanship. In this episode, he describes a trick that was played on a crowd in Haran, in Syria, relying on the impressive capacities of a very human-seeming ape. I'll now read an excerpt from that portion of the book. الباب الرابع في كشف أسرارهم. من ذلك رأيت بحران سنة 13 و600
رجل من بني سسان قد أخذ قردا وعلمه السلام على الناس والتسبيح والسواك والبكاء، ثم رأيت من هذا القرد من الناموس ما لا يقدر عليه أحد من الناس. فإذا كان يوم الجمعة أرسل عبدا هنديا نظيف الملبوس وهو حسن الشمائل، جاء الجامع إلى عند المحراب، بسط السجادة حسنة ثم راح. فإذا كان في الساعة الرابعة لبس القرد ملبوس خاص جيد من ملابيس أولاد الملوك، وجعل في وسطه حياسة لحقيمة، ثم طيبه بأنواع الطيب، ثم ركبه بغلة بالمركب ذهب محلى، ثم مشى في ركابه 3 عبيد هنود بأفخر ملبوس، الواحد يحمل الوطاء المسلى، والآخر يحمل الشرموسة، والآخر يطرق قدامه. هذا والقرد يسلم على الناس طول الطريق. فإذا دخل إلى الباب الجامعة لبسوه الشرموزة وعددوه ونزل، والعبد قدامه بالوطاء يطرق له وهو يسلم على الناس، وكل من يسأل عنه يقال له هذا ابن الملك الفلاني من أكبر ملوك الهند، وهو مسؤول. لا يزال كذلك حتى يصل إلى الموضع الذي فيه السجادة، ويفرش له العبد الوطاء فوقها، ويحط له الصبحة والمسواق، ويقلع القرد ملبوسه ومنديله من وسط الحياسة ويدعه قدامه، ثم يستاق بالمسواق ويصلى ركعتين شكر الوضوء وركعتين تحية المسجد، ثم يأخذ المسبحة ويسبح. فإذا فعل ذلك قام نهد العبد وسلم على الناس وقال يا أصحابنا من أصبح معافي فإن لله عليه نعمة لا تحصى. اعلموا أن ابن آدم هدف للبلاء، ومن ابتلي فليصبر، ومن أوفي فليشكر. واعلموا أن هذا القرد الذي ترونه بينكم والله لم يكن في زمانه أحسن منه شبابا، وهو ملك ابن ملك فلاني صاحب الجزيرة الفلانية. سبحان من سلبه الحسن والملك، ومع ذلك لم يكن في زمانه أرحم منه قلبا ولا أطوع منه لله تعالى. ولكن المؤمن ملقى للقضاء الله من قضاء المقدر، وأنه أزوجه والده بابنة الملك الفلاني، فأقام معها مدة كذا وكذا، ثم نقلوا إليها، وأنه قد عشق مملوك له، فسألته عن ذلك، فحلف بالله أن هذا الشيء ما كان، فتركته، فزاد عليها القول في ذلك، ثم لحقها من الغيرة ما يلحق أمثالها، ولم تجد عن ذلك صبرا، فطلبت منه دستورا تروح تزور أهلها وأمها 2 شهر من الزمان، فأذن لها في ذلك وجهزها كما يجب لمثلها. فلما حصلت عند أهلها سحرته كما ترون. فلما علم والده ذلك قال هذا اختلق به بين الملوك، فأمره بإخراجه من ذلك الإقليم فأخرج. قد سألنا زوجته بجميع الملوك، فأدعت أنها خلفت عنده أثاث قيمته 100,000 دينار، فلا ترده إلى صورته إلا بها. وقد تعاصبوا له الملوك وساعدوا كل منهم بالشيء، وقد حملها لها 90,000 دينار، فقد تخلف عليه 10,000 دينار. من يساعده بشيء من ذلك؟ أرحم هذا الشاب الذي قد أدم الملك والأهل والوطن، أخرج من صورته إلى صورة القردة. هذا والقرد قد جعل المنديل في وجهه وجعل يبكي بدموع مثل المطر فترق قلوب الناس لذلك وما منهم إلا من يرفضه بشيء فما يخرج من الجامع إلا بشيء كثير فهو يدور به البلد على هذه الصفة فافهم ذلك ونبح فكرك فيما يعملون بني ساسان من الدهاء والمكر.
Yes. All right, we started with a person changing into an animal. Looks like we're going to end with the animal being changed into a person. Another example. When I was in Haran in the year 613, I saw one of the Banu Sasan. These are notorious tricksters, real bastards. They sell talismans, so they printed, believe it or not. Who'd taken an ape and taught it to make salams to people, as well as to tell prayer beads using a tooth cleaning stick and to weep. Then I watched as the ape performed an illusion no human could have pulled off. It was a Friday, and the man sent an Indian slave, smartly dressed and presentable, to the mosque, and on reaching the prayer niche, he laid out a handsome carpet, after which he left. At the 4th hour, the man dressed the ape in exclusive clothes of the most luxurious sort, of the kind worn by the sons of kings, and put an expensive belt round its waist. Then he perfumed the ape with perfumes of all kinds, mounted it on a mule with a saddle decorated in gold, and assigned 3 Indian slaves wearing the finest clothes to walk it at its stirrup. The first carried its prayer mat, and the second its overshoes, while the third strutted along before it, and the ape made salams to everyone, from one end of its route to the other. Once the ape reached the door of the mosque, they put the overshoes on its feet and gave it their arm, and it dismounted. The slave with the prayer mat strutting along in front, the ape making salams. If anyone asked who it was, he was told, "This is the son of King so-and-so, one of the greatest of the kings of India, but the man is under a spell." The ape made its way like this till it came to the carpet. There the slave laid the ape's prayer mat down on the carpet and placed the prayer beads and the tooth cleaning stick in its hands. The ape now removed its clothes, pulled its handkerchief out of its cummerbund, and placed it in front of him. It rubbed his teeth with a stick and performed 2 prostrations of thanks for ablution and 2 of greeting to the mosque. Then it took the prayer beads and busied itself telling them. The moment it did so, the slave jumped up, made his salams to the people, and said, "Friends, to any who rises of a morning in good health, God has granted blessings incalculable. Know, however, that man is a target of misfortune, and any who suffers misfortune should be patient, while any who enjoys good health should be grateful. Know, too, that in its day, this ape that you see among you is the handsomest of youths, and that he is the son of King so-and-so, ruler of the island of such and such. Glory be to him who has stripped him of both good looks and princely status. Moreover, there was none in his day with a more merciful heart or more obedient to God Almighty. The believer, though, is subject to God's foreordained decrees. Now his father married him to the daughter of King so-and-so, and he lived with her for such and such length of a time. Then men passed word to her that he'd fallen in love with one of his slave boys. She asked him about this, and he swore to God there was no truth to the matter, so she let him be. Later, she heard more to the same effect, was overtaken by jealousy, to which her sex is so prone, and unable to bear it any longer, asked his permission to go and visit her family and her mother for 2 months. He granted her that permission and equipped her for the journey in accordance with her status. When she reached her family, she cast a spell on him, as you can see. When he heard what had happened, the youth's father declared, "This creature is an interloper among us kings," and ordered that he be driven from the region of the world. And so he was. Now his wife has come begging to us as well as to other kings, claiming that she left furnishings at his house worth 100,000 gold pieces,
and she refuses to restore him to his former shape till she has been paid that very sum. The kings have all banded together and helped him, each and every one contributing something, and he has sent her 90,000 gold pieces, leaving him with 10,000 still yet to pay. Who will help him with some part of that amount? Who will have mercy on this youth whose princely status, family, and homeland have all been lost to him? And who has been changed from his true form to that of this ape? Throughout all of this, the ape, handkerchief to face, wept tears like rain. Everyone's heart was moved, and each gave him something. And by the time he had left the mosque, he collected a tidy sum. The man took him all over town, pulling the same ruse. Wise up to these things, and be alert to the cunning and deceitful deeds of the Banu Sasan. Thank you.
I would like to say just a couple things about this and then open for questions. This account of a trick bears a very strong resemblance to a fictional tale, the second dervish's tale in the 1001 Nights, in which a prince is trapped within the body of an ape by a jinn. In that tale, the ape retains the prince's mastery of calligraphy and is finally rescued from his simian body by that magical princess who defeats the nasty jinn who had first trapped him in an ape's body. However, to focus on the origins of the tale told, was it Jerboa that influenced the 1001 Nights tale or not, I think is to, in some sense, fall for a trick of misdirection. I'd like to suggest that the reason that the true magic of this tale, if you permit me, is not in its narrative form. The ape's human-like behavior encourages the audience to encounter the animal, look into its eyes, and wonder, is it conceivable that there is something human inside of this ape? And conversely, we have to ask, is there something animal inside of us? And with that, I'll ask you, I'd like to, hopefully the animal inside of you is animal enough to ask questions or human enough to ask questions. Well, not sure which one of those things it is. But if you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them.